The speculation of the existence of an additional planetary body in our solar system is not the fringe discussion of decades past. In fact, as we will see later in this treatment, several contemporary mainstream academics and astronomers are busy postulating, debating, and searching for the existence of such a body in the heavens. Nonetheless, mainstream academia by and large does not support the specific notion of Nibiru as translated by certain individuals from the early Sumerian cylinder seals, specifically VA-243, that is estimated between 5,300 and 6,000 years old depending on the reference. The discussion regarding Nibiru will basically be the explanation of the ongoing confusion and debate regarding the translation of ancient Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian text, along with the scientific debate against its existence. There are key individuals that will be cited in this ongoing debate that represent primarily two opposing viewpoints. Basically, the two viewpoints can be distilled to those that believe the text are the works of myth and those that believe the text describe actual events. This video is not intended to sway the proponents on either side of the argument. The two primary groups are well entrenched in their points of view. While one group is obviously relying on the academic underpinning of its position regarding Nibiru, the other group holds fast to the argument that any translation can be incorrect, even at the academic level. For the purposes of simplification, these two groups will be designated as the academics and the renegade scholars. To be clear about the word renegade, the definition applicable here is a person who leaves one group, religion, etc. and joins another that opposes it. Prior to the release of Zecharia Sitchin's The 12th Planet in 1976, there exist only a few academic articles related to the topic of Nibiru. In 1961, B. Landsberger and J.B. Kinnear Wilson published the article titled The Fifth Tablet of Enuma Elish, and in 1936, Albert Scott published the article Marduk und sein Stern, which means Marduk and his stars. This fact is presented here in order to make an important observation. The rarity of research material related to Nibiru seems to support the notion that translation of Sumerian cuneiform was and is a rare skill set shared among few, at least up till 1976 and likely well beyond. Before we move forward, it is of vital importance to establish a historical perspective. First, our discussion involves the earliest writings of man. So exactly how old is that? To clarify, we are talking about languages, not cave paintings in this context. To gain a full understanding of what is to follow, understanding the ancient language timeline is a prerequisite. The three oldest writing systems which we currently recognize are cuneiform, Elamite, and Egyptian. Although Sumerian has become synonymous with cuneiform, that is not exactly accurate. The Sumerian writing system, along with Elamite, began at the earliest demarcation of cuneiform, circa 3200 to 3000 BCE, but it was not cuneiform's only form. Akkadian and Old Persian technically fall under that same category at 2500 BCE and 550 BCE respectively. Ancient Egyptian appears around 3100 BCE. Additionally, two other writing systems are worth mention in this general context. The Indus script of South Asia and the Quipu of the Americas, both appearing approximately 2600 BCE. According to Sumerian astronomy, indirectly referenced through the Babylonians, Nibiru is a term of the highest point of the ecliptic, for example, the point of summer solstice and its associated constellation. As the highest point in the paths of the planets, Nibiru was considered the seat of the Sumus Deus, who pastures the stars like sheep. In Babylon, identified with Marduk. The establishment of the Nibiru point is described in Tablet 5 of the creation epic Enuma Elish, quote, when Marduk fixed the locations of Nibiru, Enlil, and Ea in the sky, end quote. Nibiru is mentioned at different astronomical locations in conjunction with the positions of stars and planets, mostly as the star of Marduk. However, the various stars or planets were not subject to any fixed interpretation. For example, the star of Ea was described at various revelation spots including Vela, Fomalhaut, and Venus. Similar interpretations were made for other stars of the gods, so multiple celestial coordinates must be considered. Nibiru is described more closely on a complete cuneiform tablet. Quote, Nibiru, which is said to have occupied the passageways of heaven and earth because everyone above and below asked Nibiru if they cannot find the passage. Nibiru is Marduk's star, which the gods in heaven calls to be visible. Nibiru stands as a post at the turning point. The others say of Nibiru, the post, the only one who crosses the middle of the sea, Tiamat, without calm, may his name be Nibiru, for he takes up the center of it. The path of the stars of the sky should be kept unchanged. In 1936, FMT Bowl called the above text, quote, objectively the most difficult passage, although it has been handed down in its entirety. The Nibiru tablet does not provide any essential help for the clarification, end quote. In the Akkadian language, Nibiru is translated to crossing, or point of transition, especially of rivers. Nibiru has been associated with the area of Libra. The Nibiru constellation rose in the month of Tisridum around autumn equinox. However, Nibiru was also a name for the planet Jupiter when observed in the month of Tisridum. Reference to Jupiter is found in the Mulipin. When the stars of Enlil have been finished, one big star, although its light is dim, divides the sky in half and stands there. That is the star of Marduk, Nibiru, Jupiter. It keeps changing its position and crosses the sky. This chart was compiled by Michael Heiser, a leading academic on the subject of Nibiru. Since he is a leading critic of Zecharia Sitchin, it has been determined that by using his own research, the hypocrisy of academia can be fully exposed. We will be revisiting this individual's endeavors shortly, but for now, let's take a look at his own chart. At number 1, we have the Enuma Elish Tablet 5, line 6, where it says, he set fast the position of Nibiru to fix their bounds. Number 2, Enuma Elish Tablet 7, line 124, says, let Nibiru be the holder of the crossing place of the heaven and of the earth. Number 3, the Enuma Elish Tablet 7, line 126 and 130 through 131, states Nibiru is his star, which he made appear in the heavens. The stars of heaven, let him set their course, let him shepherd all the gods like sheep. Number 4, we have the Astrolabe B, the star catalog. It says the red star which stands in the south after the gods of the night have been finished, dividing the sky in half. This star is Nibiru. Number 5, we have the Mulipin, where it states, when the stars of Enlil have been finished, one big star, although its light is dim, divides the sky in half and stands there. That is the star of Marduk, Nibiru, Jupiter. It keeps changing its position and crosses the sky. Then we have several more references in the various star list and also tablets, and then there are 2 omen texts as well. This chart represents the generally accepted consensus related to the term Nibiru. There are 2 unequivocal facts with which the academics agree. Number 1, the term Nibiru is real and appears multiple times in the Enuma Elish, Astrolabe B, Mulipin, and cuneiform Babylonian tablets rendering various star lists. Number 2, among other meanings, the academics agree that in several circumstances the term Nibiru is representative of a star, planet, or god. The extent to which this becomes explained away by academia goes to the larger argument of myth versus reality alluded to earlier, and it will be discussed in detail in following sections. One can argue that there are as many alternate points of view as people who write about Nibiru and do not agree with the academic consensus. Nevertheless, we will discuss the original alternative theory posited by Zecharia Sitchin. It is the most well-known and researched of any alternatives in the archive's opinion, It has certainly stood the test of time, although the academics would sharply disagree. Sitchin was Russian-born and raised in Palestine. He graduated from the University of London with a degree in economic history before working several years as a journalist and editor in Israel. Sitchin's theories are predicated on the premise that ancient myths are not myths, but historical and scientific text. One of Sitchin's core assertions is that Nibiru is a planet that orbits our sun every 3,450 years. The following citation summarizes Sitchin's primary theory. Quote, "Working from the same archaeological discoveries, artifacts, and recovered records as archaeologists and linguists have for 200 years, Sitchin propounds that the Anunnaki, an advanced civilization from the 10th planet in our solar system, splashed down in the Persian Gulf area around 432,000 years ago, colonized the planet with the purpose of obtaining large quantities of gold. Some 250,000 years ago, the recovered documents tell us their lower echelon miners rebelled against the conditions in the mines, and the Anunnaki Directorate decided to create a creature to take their place. Enki, their chief scientist, and Ninhursag, their chief medical officer, after getting no satisfactory results splicing animal and Homo erectus genes, merged their Anunnaki genes with that of Homo erectus and produced us, Homo sapiens, a genetically bicameral species for the purposes as slaves. Because we were a hybrid, we could not procreate. The demand for us as workers became greater, and we were genetically manipulated to reproduce. Eventually, we became so numerous that some of us were expelled from the Anunnaki city centers, gradually spreading over the planet. Having become a stable genetic stock and developing more precociously than perhaps the Anunnaki had anticipated, the Anunnaki began to be attracted to humans as sexual partners, and children were born of these unions. This was unacceptable to the majority of the Anunnaki High Council, and it was decided to wipe out the human population through a flood that was predictable when Nibiru, the 10th in our solar system and the Anunnaki home planet, came through the inner solar system again around 12,500 years ago, on one of its periodic 3,600-year returns. Some humans were saved by the action of the Anunnaki official Enki, who was sympathetic to the humans he had originally genetically created. For thousands of years, we were their slaves, their workers, their servants, and their soldiers in their political battles among themselves. The Anunnaki used us in the construction of their palaces, their cities, their mining and refining complexes, and their astronomical installations on all the continents. They expanded from Mesopotamia to Egypt to India to South and Central America, and the stamp of their presence can be found in the farthest reaches of the planet. Around 6,000 years ago, they, probably realizing that they were going to phase off the planet, began to gradually bring humans to independence. Sumer, a human civilization, amazing in its sudden and mature, highly advanced character, was set up under their tutelage in Mesopotamia. Human kings were inaugurated as go-betweens, foremen of the human populations answering to the Anunnaki. Some humans were taught technology, mathematics, astronomy, advanced crafts, and the ways of civilized society. The high civilizations of Egypt and Central America arose. The Anunnaki became somewhat more remote from humans. By around 1250 BC, they had gone into their final phase-out mode. The human population and the foreman kings, now left on their own, began to fend for themselves. For some 3,000 years subsequently, we humans have been going through a traumatic transition to independence. Proprietary claims made by various groups of humans as to who knew what we should be doing to get the Anunnaki to return, or when they returned, perpetuated the palace and social rituals learned under the Anunnaki, and sometimes disagreement and strife broke out between them. Religion as we know it took form, focused on the god or gods, clearly and unambiguously known to the humans who were in contact with them as imperfect, flesh and blood humanoids, now absent. It was only much later that the Anunnaki were eventually sublimated into cosmic character and status, and later on mythologized due to remoteness in time. Sitchin further refined Nibiru's timeline in his book titled The End of Days. He explained that as Nibiru flew by, Uranus caught Miranda, a moon of Nibiru. Such an occurrence, a moon of Nibiru striking Uranus, would have affected the orbit of Nibiru, slowing it down to about 3,450 Earth years, rather than 3,600, and resulting in a post-diluvial reappearance schedule of circa 7,450, circa 4,000, and circa 550 BCE. If that is what had happened, it would suggest the early arrival of Nibiru in 556 BCE, and suggest that its next arrival will be circa 2900 AD. It cannot be overstated that the ignorance of this timeline explanation, or the outright perversion of it, accounts for the pathetic state of affairs in the pop culture, where countless individuals erroneously believe the planet Nibiru is about to hit Earth. With this presentation and others that are delineating the truth, the pop culturalists can no longer legitimately claim ignorance. However, many do indeed ignore the truth because it does not put a colliding planet on our doorstep for several more centuries, and even then, it is not necessarily destined to collide with Earth. Even so, the vast majority of the pop culture have moved beyond ignorance and straight into stupidity by claiming a forthcoming Nibiru collision on a monthly basis. In general, when an alternative theory is put forth that discounts or directly refutes established academic consensus, even from within its own ranks, one can be assured of an onslaught of discrediting and ridicule. Unfortunately, this occurs most often regardless of whether the alternative view has merit or not. The entire concept of ancient astronauts is nearly completely rejected by mainstream academia. Sitchin, insofar as his work represents the essence of such theory, has become the favorite target of the aforementioned ridicule and criticism. There have been some rather prolific critics, however, that in their zeal to debunk have left holes in their own academic treatments of the subject. This brings up a rather interesting question. If one approaches this subject from the academic consensus point of view, is it acceptable to make suppositions in favor of one's argument without actual evidence and then turn around and accuse the target of the criticism of the same behavior? Apparently, that is the case on many occasions in the academic community. After all, if you have staked your doctoral thesis on the debunking of a single person's work, then you would likely go to your grave defending the position regardless of it being right, wrong, or somewhere in between. Better that than suffer being discredited and succumbing to the same exact ridicule leveled by your peers towards your own work. Fortunately for the academics, they rarely turn on one another and consume their own. But since Sitchin has become the target of several academics, it is worth a bit of time to examine both sides of this issue. It is beyond the purview of this particular work to address the criticisms of the entire ancient astronaut hypothesis. With that said, the subject of Nibiru offers probably the best examples of the overall academic condemnation. There seems to be two primary criticisms of Sitchin regardless of the individual, one from the academic camp and one from the scientific camp. Since there are several individuals standing in line to write the next book or article that debunks Sitchin, we will focus on two individuals that represent each of the two primary criticisms. Two academics that have already put forth their best efforts in debunking his work. Without a doubt, the number one criticism leveled against Sitchin's research can be found in the effort to debunk his alternative theories based on the premise that he mistranslated either ignorantly or deliberately the ancient Sumerian text. This quote by Michael Heiser fairly well sums up the translation criticism. Quote, "If one wants to know what Nibiru as an astronomical body is, one is dependent on these texts, unless, like Zecharia Sitchin, one makes up meanings to prop up a theory. One either lets the text tell you what Nibiru is, or ignores the scribes in favor of Sitchin." End quote. As such, let us examine what Heiser says the texts actually mean, and see if such a criticism is warranted. In his paper, The Myth of a Sumerian 12th Planet, Nibiru According to the Cuneiform Sources, Heiser makes the following statement prior to presenting the chart provided previously in the video that lists the occurrences of the word Nibiru. Quote, in the texts that follow, Nibiru was regarded as a planet, specifically Jupiter, but once as Mercury, a god, specifically Marduk, and a star distinguished from Jupiter. If you're confused, you're not alone. The trifold, or fourfold if you count Mercury, designation for Nibiru is why scholars of cuneiform astronomy have not been able to determine with certainty what exactly Nibiru is. We'll go into the problem more in later sections. One thing is certain from these texts, though. Nibiru is never identified as a planet beyond Pluto. End quote. Did you catch that? Why scholars of cuneiform astronomy have not been able to determine with certainty what exactly Nibiru is. Yet, in the following sentence, Heiser states unequivocal certainty about Nibiru. Now, let's be very clear about this point, because this is a hole academia digs for itself over and over again when arguing translations from ancient text. First, Heiser's statement, quote, one thing is certain from the text, though. Nibiru is never identified as a planet beyond Pluto, end quote, is woefully incomplete. What should have been said to qualify the statement is, quote, one thing is certain from the text that we, academia, have translated thus far. Nibiru is never identified as a planet beyond Pluto, end quote. The probable reason such a qualification was not given is that it opens the door for the possibility that Sitchin referenced text that Heiser or other academics have yet to translate themselves. Second, even the texts that Heiser has translated indicate Nibiru was referenced as more than the planet Jupiter. In many cases, it is described as a star. Heiser himself states, quote, as noted previously, Nibiru was regarded as a planet, specifically Jupiter, but once as Mercury, a god, specifically Marduk, and a star, distinguished from Jupiter, end quote. Unless Heiser and the rest of academia have translated every single available text, which they have not, I would suggest the use of unequivocal statements is rather dubious. The overall built-in presumption that he and the rest of academia have translated all the available texts pervades Heiser's entire argument. And we will go into detail about this in a moment. However, it is prudent to make a significant point at this juncture. When it comes to translation of ancient text, it is a risky proposition to claim exclusive knowledge of the meanings. Sitchin is criticized relentlessly by academia for this very approach. Ironically, though, academia does the same exact thing, as we can see from just one of Heiser's quotes. A good example of where the meanings of translation were either changed or put into another context are the Dead Sea Scrolls. The early mistranslation of the Dead Sea Scrolls clearly demonstrates why it is unwise to convey any translation as the correct one when there is a measurable amount of untranslated material outstanding. That statement applies not only to Sitchin, but also the academics that discredit him. In essence, the archive cannot reject Sitchin's translation based simply on the contention by academia that they know the correct meanings, especially when, as in this case, an academic flat out says, quote, this trifold, or fourfold if you count Mercury, designation for Nibiru is why scholars of cuneiform astronomy have not been able to determine with certainty what exactly Nibiru is, end quote. We will finish up the translation section by covering what seems to be Heiser's primary argument against Sitchin. Quote, Sitchin's entire cosmological mythological system is based on 3 lines of argument. Number 1, the cylinder seal VA243. In a nutshell, the sun on the seal, which allegedly depicts the solar system, is not the sun, based on the consistent style of the actual sun symbol in Sumerio-Mesopotamian seals and art. Without a sun, you don't have a solar system. Number 2, the claim that Nibiru lies beyond Pluto and is home to the Anunnaki, neither of which come from the actual text. Number 3, the reconstruction of the formation of our solar system accomplished by matching the names of gods in Sumerian creation, cosmological text, with planets, and then describing a cosmic billiards scenario supposedly conveyed to us in these texts. Cuneiform astronomical texts never list any more than 5 planets, 7 if one counts the sun and the moon, and actually tell us which planets are which gods in their mythology. It should be no surprise that the Sumerio-Akkadian planet god correlations disagree with Sitchin's. Okay, let's take these in order. Number 1. In an open letter, Heiser gives a bit more detail in the form of its question number 6. Quote, "Can you explain why the alleged sun symbol on cylinder seal VA243 is not the normal sun symbol or the symbol for the sun god Shamash?" End quote. Well, as it turns out, someone answered this question, along with the other 7 presented in the open letter. Alessandro de Montes, in fact, presented 3 images captioned, quote, "There are at least 5 different depictions of the sun, depending on the period and place. The most known sigil of Shamash is this, at the Louvre Museum in Paris." End quote. Heiser's reaction to the response is a showcase in how academia uses ridicule in place of retort when contrary evidence is presented to its consensus. Heiser says, "Your mistake is twofold. Number 1, apparently not knowing what the word normal means here. For example, I never said that the symbol was the exclusive one used. And number 2, not producing a sun sign that looks like the one I'm questioning in VA243. Oops, the one on the left is closest but lacks a center circle." End quote. So, as you can see, he was required to go back and qualify the question to account for the pictures provided and made an attempt at condescension in the process. Second, he claims that a sun symbol was not produced, but he then backtracked with further qualification as there was at least one obviously provided. This is a tried-true tactic of an academic, and his response speaks for itself. Again, notice the presumption that all cylinder seals have been found and translated well enough to establish a convention. Remember the Dead Sea Scrolls lesson? Number 2. Heiser says both the possibility of Nibiru lying beyond Pluto and the likelihood of it being the home of the Anunnaki are not found in the text. But they are found in the text. It is just not verbatim nor together. De Montes once again provided a very cogent response. Quote, "As far as I know, but I have no access to all the Sumerian material, there is no text saying exactly that the Anunnaki came from Nibiru. But there is reference in the Enuma Elish that Nibiru is a planet coming from the outer solar system. In Tablet 1, it is said that Marduk comes from the deep and that it is an invader. And in Tablet 6 and 7, it is said that Marduk is Nibiru. So 2 plus 2 equals 4. Nibiru is a planet coming from the depths invading the solar system. For more about this matter, you should see my article about the Enuma Elish. As for the provenance of the Anunnaki, it is said in the Enuma Elish that they come from the sky. Some of them came to earth and others stayed in the sky. There is also reference to Nibiru as the star of Anu." End quote. Number 3. Finally, by the third point of his argument, we get to the core of why academia is just as guilty as anyone that it blames for begging the question. The phrase begging the question refers to the question in a formal debate. That is, the issue being debated. In such a debate, one side may ask the other side to concede certain points in order to speed up the proceedings. To beg the question is to ask that the very point at issue be conceded, which is of course illegitimate. So how does this apply to the third point of Heiser's argument? It goes back to the presumption that all that has been uncovered in the text represents all that will ever be uncovered. More importantly, he says the text never lists more than 5 planets. Well, that is where he is really begging the question, because there is a huge reality left out of his observation. When it comes to translating ancient Sumerian text, there is a rather significant lineage of sources that builds on one another. It only takes the slightest mistranslation at any particular link in the chain to proliferate into the wrong conclusion. Again, something academia uses to debunk others, but something it rarely admits happening in its own ranks. The fact of this matter is that modern scholars rarely possess the ability to translate directly from ancient Sumerian into English or any modern language. By far, the vast majority require lexical aids. Therefore, the overriding assumption is that the aid is accurate. Such aids have been proven less than accurate over the last few decades especially. But here is a practical concern that is never really addressed in this particular translation. Many sources are incomplete, either because a tablet was broken or the lexicon is based on a copy of a copy of a copy. That is an undeniable truth, one which Heiser conveniently ignores with the use of unequivocal terms such as never. Thus, by his response to the following retort of his third point of argument against Sitchin, it becomes apparent it's more about ridicule than actual debate. De Montis provided the following response to point 3. Quote, "If you would have read Sitchin's books, you should know that the problem with the planetary list is that they have been translated by our Assyriologist in the frame of mind that the ancient peoples only knew a certain number of planets. So they rearranged the names of planets and gods to the planets that they thought the Sumerians would know. This method resulted in 2 or more planets sharing the same Akkadian or Sumerian name and being associated to the same god. A typical example is Mul-Bebar, that is attributed both to the sun, as Bebar was the name for Shamash, and to Jupiter because Jupiter was supposed to be Marduk, and Marduk was supposed to be called Mul-Bebar. Another example is Nibiru, that the scholars explain to be a name for both Mercury and Jupiter, preferring not to say why it would be so." End quote. And here is Heiser's response, quote, "This is absolutely bogus. They know what the words in the text mean. Why do you ask? Because the vocabulary is known from lexical lists, bilingual dictionaries created by the Mesopotamians themselves." This response shows where Sitchinites like the responder are really at. The naughty Assyriologists out there just haven't been enlightened by our hero. If they had read his books, they'd know how to translate this stuff. Yeah, right. End quote. The archive hastens to point out the fact that there is nothing of academic value in Michael Heiser's retort. At this point, he has been reduced to pure ridicule. My only guess is that De Montis really got under his skin, thus triggering a purely emotional response, or he was simply having a bad day. Either way, such a response is indicative of a so-called academic behaving the exact way which he condemns other so-called non-academics. Remember Heiser's statement one more time. Quote, "This trifold, fourfold if you count Mercury, designation for Nibiru is why scholars of cuneiform astronomy have not been able to determine with certainty what exactly Nibiru is." End quote. Yet, he and academia at large continue to form arguments as if they know exactly everything about Nibiru. The archive rejects that double standard. It may seem that we are nitpicking Heiser, but the truth is when someone creates a website called Sitchin is Wrong, that person has decided to be the debunker representative on the matter de facto. Unfortunately, this treatment is only focused on Nibiru. Similar inconsistencies are replete in academia's translations and would warrant an entire book. However, if the reader would like more information about such inconsistencies, the archive suggests following up with the research conducted by De Montis. Here are the links, and we have also posted those in the description as well.